doesn't exist anymore. And the fact that it doesn't exist anymore kind of is disappointing. What makes this work is the door in that soft pink. And I'll admit, for most of the year, it look great. But when the purple sand cherries, not a hoity-toity plant, but when the purple sand cherries are in bloom and you get the soft pink flowers against the pink door, and that brings out the pinks of the stone, it's these little details that can make any garden work, but especially a cottage garden. And it doesn't, you get surprises. There's a plant that has these soft yellow flowers, and it's called the Anthemis sauce hollandaise. And I thought it would be clever to paint a bench the color of the petals. So whoop, off comes a petal, and off I go to the hardware store, and I get them to match the paint. And I get home and I stir it all up and I start painting it. What the goodness gracious. It was chartreuse. It was blinding acid yellow green. And like, what just happened? The yellow heart of the daisy contrasts and complements the chartreuse petals. So you get this overall creamy flower. The individual parts of the flower, which is what I was aiming for unintentionally, are not what you see overall. It worked. It worked. This blinding chartreuse bench still worked because it complemented the flowers around it. So you get surprises, and I like to say that serendipity is my best friend. My gardens tend to be a series of happy accidents. I will go and I will buy plants, and I will place them in the garden with a little flag in them so I don't forget to water them, and I'll move them around until I find somewhere that they work. You can design a cottage garden from scratch, but you can also evolve a cottage garden. In fact, many gardens would evolve into a cottage garden. It can be anywhere. It can be any house. This is a fairly traditional house, but it captures that, especially if you look at the inset. The overall garden is a crowd pleaser. Most people would like that garden. Not everybody likes every garden. If people don't like your garden, that's fine. It's your garden. I had people who vehemently hated my garden when I lived in Milton. It was English cottage on steroids. And some people didn't get it, and other people did, but that's okay. That's art, and your art is your art. But there were patches of this garden when you zoomed in on it that were very cottagey in and of themselves. So that's noteworthy as well. We're getting incredible demand now for natives and xeriscaping and cottagey and sort of little mini botanic gardens. These all work really well together. This is a garden in Oakville that the Oakville Horticultural Society initiated, and they wanted a biodiversity garden. And so part of biodiversity is having as many food sources as you can. So there's a wide variety of plants in there. Any garden works if it's texture first. Flowers come and go. Texture will make or break your landscape. You want to have a mix of feathery and bold and sword-shaped or grassy textures. In an English cottage garden, you want seasonal interest changing all the way through the seasons. It's the demand that's showing up now for eco-friendly landscape design is incredible. You look at the number of people who have milkweeds in their garden, which is actually, oddly enough, a really good cottagey plant, because for starters, it goes where it wants to. At least common milkweed does. There are other better behaved milkweeds, more refined, if you will. But the common milkweed goes where it wants. It's got great big bold textured leaves. It's got billowy, fragrant flowers, and it's forever covered in pollinators and so on. And a cottage garden is never going to be static. It's going to evolve. If you drove past this particular garden that's in the slide there today, it does not look a lot like it did when we created it. It's evolving, and that's okay. Gardens evolve. They need refereeing, and that's our job. This is my old garden when it was very young, and there are cottage garden plants. Now, you don't have to use these plants, but there are cottage garden plants that are fussy. They're princesses. They're like irises. I always kept swearing to myself I wasn't going to buy any more irises because they need a lot of work. And then I go, ooh, it's so pretty. And I'd find a place for it. And also cottage gardens tend to be where the things that get thrown out from other gardens have a place in a cottage garden. So for the longest time, this bright yellow drift here, this is just 4 o'clocks on Othra. And I love them. They bloom brilliantly, colorfully. They make a nice foil to many other things. And they have beautiful fall color, beautiful red fall color. So this is the garden in June, the old garden. Gosh, it looks different. There's a little tiny tree in here that filled this whole area. And this is the same garden in the fall. A few years later, granted, but I'm forever mooching pieces off my friends of this chrysanthemum. Which chrysanthemum is it? I ask. I don't know. My Aunt Bessie gave it to me. Oh, okay. So it's Bessie's chrysanthemum. That's okay. It doesn't have to be a botanical garden. Form, you can do anything you want in a cottage garden. I mean, I'm pro-native. I plant a lot of native plants, but I like plants too much to just plant natives. And you can have tropicals like a banana in a pot that gives that incredible. You don't need any more bold texture in that garden if you've got a banana. One year we planted a palm tree, a 12-foot palm tree. I found it inexpensively, cheap. And we planted it in the garden and we almost caused an accident because someone slammed on their brakes to look at it. You can do whatever you want. There are no real rules. If you want a garden to look pretty, you start with texture, then foliage color, then seasonal blooms. Having said that, you want a few bones in the landscape. You want a few things that are going to be solid all season long. And you also want that progression from early spring. I layer a lot of plants. I'll have things that come up and then die down, and then something else comes up and then goes away. So there's a lot of factors at play. Another thing that you can do, if the garden looks too jumbled to you, you can repeat something distinctive, like Bergenia. Bergenia has these great big, almost cabbage-like leaves. Repeat that in 3 or 5 places through the garden. That will calm the eye and lead your eye through the garden. Now, of course, I didn't do that here. I used to play the saxophone, and I took up the saxophone because I wanted to relax more, but I was getting too stressed driving back and forth to the saxophone lessons to relax. But in the meantime, while I was learning the saxophone, I thought, why is this music beautiful? Why does this song or that song resonate with me? And I find one art form bleeds into another. So I took that lesson and I started thinking about, why is this or that pretty? So this is just a picture of German status with a tiger swallowtail in the middle of it. It's just a pretty picture. And I think most folks would recognize that it's pretty. But it's got complementing colors. It's got contrasting textures. It has a point of interest to attract and hold your eye. This simple picture, when you start thinking about why is X beautiful? When I was at the Niagara Park School, we went to Whimsical Gardens, and I fell in love with 2 plants, one which I have fallen out of love with, as is the way of gardeners. I fell in love with pickerelweed, which is a local native water plant. Great big, bold, glossy foliage, beautiful purple flowers that the pollinators love. I got a great picture somewhere of a monarch on this. And the red tinted plant beside it is umbrella plant, Darmera peraltatum from California. And great big, bold texture. So that, again, that section of garden is pretty. I would never use the Darmera again. It's hardy, it's lovely, it's got a neat pink flower in the spring, and it takes over the world. But that's gardening. You live and learn. I've killed a lot of plants over the years because I realized that, oops. So that's all right. There's no ASPCA for plants. No one's going to come and arrest you. Water is welcome in any garden. I think, in fact, it's essential in any garden. Again, this is Great Dixter by Christopher Lloyd. Honestly, it looked like man had created a hardscape and Mother Nature had thrown down some seeds. It was just so natural and beautiful. Every little nook and cranny was filled. And when you have water in the garden, that primitive part of your brain relaxes a little bit because it knows today I will not die of dehydration. The same as when there are birds in the garden, that primitive part of your brain knows there's no predators around. If the birds are flapping around and noisy, you know there's no predators, so that primitive part of your brain goes, today I will not get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. I can relax a little bit. So these are valuable lessons, incidentally, for any garden. But you can see, just to snap back to that for a second, the different textures that are in here, the sword-shaped texture. There's not a lot of bold in this image, although you may get it from a single form, even though a lot of evergreens have fluffy form. When you globe them, it becomes a bold thing. In fact, in my old garden, and it's not visible in that last picture, I took a globe blue spruce standard, so a popsicle on a stick, and I pruned that into a square. There was a perfect globe, golden globe cedar, so blue and yellow, and then a U that we made into a pyramid. So 3 very formal geometric shapes, 3 different colors, and that formal shaping and artistic shaping made a counterpoint to all the billowiness everywhere else. It gave art, but also a little bit of, okay, there's some human hand here. There's a little bit of sanity somewhere. I can accept that. This is an old garden where I grew up, actually, and water is just so amazing, especially if you have the sound, and that takes the oomph out of city noises as well. And you get birds coming to drink from it, dragonfly larvae living in it, which will take down your mosquitoes. A lot of good can come from water in the garden. And be creative. We had a customer who wanted a pond, and someone had planted 2 rows of Norway spruce and a lilac. And as the spruce grew, they grew out and out and out, and the poor lilac was just reaching out for light forever. And it had this incredible artful stem. It looked like someone had wrung it out like a face cloth because it was bending as it grew. And so we tucked the pond underneath it. Mind you, we had to prune the lilac in the winter when you could walk on the pond, but it tied it all together nicely. If you can find something artful in your landscape to build a vignette around, then that can be a really powerful thing. I'm not a landscape architect. I'm a landscape designer. I respect some landscape architects, very much, in fact. And yet I'm happy being a landscape designer because I'm very plant-based and I want as many plants as possible. Landscape designers often think in terms of grand artistic drifts of 3 or 4 types of plants. And I look at vignettes. You'll notice that a lot of the gardens that we're looking at, you could take a little picture of part of the picture, and that's something beautiful for a while. And then in the fall, you've got something else over here. These little lance-leaved hostas would be coming into bloom. And sometimes you get a secondary bloom on the flowering raspberry. And you get all of the different textures in there. I design in vignettes. So here's a little fall vignette. Beside it is a spring vignette. Here's something structural like a weeping white pine, and then a summer vignette beside that. And then maybe the summer vignette also has something that's going to be neat in the winter to give me that additional seasonal interest. I'm glad this is being recorded because I'm bouncing around a little too much, but also there's a lot of information I'm realizing packed into a simple English cottage garden speech. Not every plant has to be special. This is lemon lily. It's a species daylily, and species daylilies, I like species plants, generally speaking, better. They get fewer diseases as a general statement. They tend to be more fragrant, a little more natural, a little less refined, like me. So this is just lemon lily stuck in front of a waterfall. So the contrast of the bold texture of the stones, the texture doesn't have to come from the plants. It can come from the hardscaping as well. You've got some bones in here, even though it's short. This is a Japanese garden juniper. Lovely plant, bulletproof, great at any landscape, by the way. And then you've, in addition to the waterfall back here, which sort of cuts through on an angle, to keep water flowing, there's a secondary fountain that just keeps water moving in what would be a dead spot in the pond, and it gives extra motion in the garden. Every tool in your toolbox can be used in an English cottage garden. If We often forget about motion in the garden. Motion is important. Grasses swaying in the wind, the trembling aspens, which I love, shimmering in the wind. Speaking of wind, what about sound? Sound in the garden is spectacularly beautiful. You get the grasses whispering and so on. These are all important issues. Maybe you like, maybe you don't like wind chimes. There are different things that you can do to give varieties of sound in the garden. Sun or shade? I'm still on water, but I'm also thinking about sun and shade. We're very specific about sun and shade in the landscape, in the textbooks. This is a sun plant. This is a shade plant. Baloney. This is the true north side of the house that I grew up in, with sugar maples around. And yet we had a flowering almond that was beautiful all the time. There was a clematis alpina, growing up over the railing of that little bridge and so on. Try plants. If they don't do well, move them somewhere else. Give them to your friend. If they're taking over, give them to your friend you don't like. You can play with gardens. Gardens are supposed to be fun. If you ever get a chance to hear Dr. Alan Armitage, Canadian, speak, he works in the States. He works in the University of Georgia. There's a list of the 10 most influential horticulturists in history. One of them is alive. He's Dr. Alan Armitage. And one of his messages constantly is relax. It's gardening. It's supposed to be fun. And we forget about that. We get all stressed about things not doing well. Another little water feature that I did in my own garden. You'll note that a lot of these pictures of my gardens. Again, a variety of plants, even weeds. I'll let something go and see how it does. For several years, we had teasel in the garden. And I will let thistles grow in my garden. And everybody thought me mad, until August. And then they came to the garden and went, how do you get all the goldfinches? They took all the thistle seed eventually. There were very few thistles coming up, and a cottage garden is sort of shoulder to shoulder. So people worry about maintenance. When you plant things shoulder to shoulder, there's not many places for the weeds to grow. And then every other year I'd mulch with a good rich compost. And there's a lovely place now, Elm Vale Farms, and they're selling the best composted mulch I've ever seen, and reasonable too. And they deliver it reasonably. And they're in, I'm not sure if it's Woolwich or Elora, but I'm really happy to have access to good composted mulch again. Like I said, you can do anything. There's a sumac here, but there's also edibles in this picture. I grew squash up over the water feature. I grew beans up over the garage door. Anything that you want to cram in. And a lot of vegetables are absolutely beautiful. You talk about bold texture. Let's say that you looked at your garden one day. There's a fairly famous story about, in the gardening world, about a lady in England, and she had done her own garden, but she knew something wasn't right. So she called in this very famous garden designer and paid him a boatload of money. And he walked into the backyard and went, your leaves are all the same size, and left. She was furious until she realized that that was the problem. Everything that she had sort of summer phlox or goldenrod shaped leaves. All she had to do was throw in some grasses and some bold texture, and bam, it was spectacular. Sometimes it takes a second set of eyes, as it were. But when you look at, I think of plants and hardscaping, I think of everything as part of a palette. What do I need to fill? What's going to fill that niche when I'm designing? I'm going to choose native plants because they do so much for biodiversity. But then I'm going to look at the whole palette to see what is going to do the job that I want. I am almost always looking for drought tolerance, unless it's for a wet corner of the yard. Don't fill in the wet areas and knock off the dry high ground. Use what you have and plant the plants that like those areas. And then you'll find you have a much more interesting garden, because if you're planting for the low wet area, not only do you now not have to mow that area, but you're getting to plant really cool things like sparkleberry or winterberry, which is a boring name, which is our native deciduous holly. A spectacular plant in winter. And I hate to break it to you, but winter lasts a long damn time. Make sure your garden looks good in the winter. Now you can plant cardinal flowers and blue flag iris and marsh marigolds in that wet area. Now you can plant more interesting things that you can't put in the high dry garden. Use the weirdness that you have. Nothing, there's no bad bits of your garden. Oh, I've got dry shade. Yeah, but now you can plant Solomon seal, and you can plant flowering raspberries, and you can plant a variety of sedges in your garden. Things that love dry shade that nobody else plants. Well, everybody plants Solomon seal, but still, it's an opportunity to do cool things. This garden here is a 100% edible garden, and it's designed with the same principles of an English cottage garden. We did put things in rows and blocks, and we mixed them up quite a bit. We didn't put all the cabbages together to be orderly. You sit over there, behave. We mixed it up so that then you have a better predator-prey relationship. We had a few things in for early pollinators and late pollinators, but generally speaking, it was all edible. And even the non-traditionals often tended toward being edible. And we did companion planting and all that jazz. So you can take the idea, the principles of cottage gardening, and carry them through anything. Art in the garden, to me, is extremely powerful. I think it's necessary. For starters, it adds a little necessary man-made hand, right? An artificialness that, again, like those sculpture plants that I told you about, they counterpoint the wild weird. Okay. This is the edible garden at the Niagara Park School. This is food that is eaten by the students, but art, even there, is a part of it. And even something like an arbor can be part of it. And I designed an arbor a little while ago that had a spider web built into it. We did a wood round, and we drilled holes, and we put cedar in on angles, and then we used silver wire to make the spider web in the arbor. This is an herb garden. And I mean, it's the epitome of billowy and mixed up and all sorts of stuff of an English cottage garden. And that's at Hampton Court in England. You don't have to be in England. You don't have to be in Southern Ontario. You can, I don't know about a xeriscaped. Well, yeah, no. But if you're in Arizona, it's going to be tougher to do an English cottage garden. There's no doubt about it. And you really want to avoid, if you were going to try and pull off a cottage garden in Arizona, you'd have to use some pretty exotic stuff, South African stuff and so on. Watch out for invasives. For the love of dog, don't plant invasives in your garden, because they take away food for all the butterflies that we love. That's super simplifying, but you get the idea. Gardens can be rectilinear or curvilinear, or a combination of the two. Perennials that I like for the shade. The one non-native is big root geranium, but there's spotted geranium, the native geranium, sedges, Solomon seal. Those are the best. But ferns. Now, the irony with drought-tolerant landscaping is you have to water things more. You have to pay more attention to watering for the first year. You have to make sure that things don't dry out. You want to give them an inch a week, deeply, water deeply, so that they get their roots deep in the ground. Then they'll be drought tolerant. Ferns are even a little more picky. Maybe even a couple of years, you got to pay attention to the watering. They mustn't dry out. Curves soothe us. Rectilinear designs give a formality to a landscape. They can be quite lovely, but curves cycle. There is a psychology to gardening. Curves soothe us. Hardscaping. I love plants. Did I mention I love plants? I love plants. I resent hardscaping and the money that it costs, because every penny that I spend on a stone is a penny that I can't spend on plants. And yet we need hardscaping. You need to be able to get from here to there. You're having friends over, you can't make them sit in the garden. They're going to sit on the plants, and Devin's the plants, and I care about the plants more than the humans. You need a place for people to sit. You can soften hardscaping by allowing plants to grow in the nooks and crannies, but that has to be refereed. This is still Great Dexter, and it is still beautiful, although it's interesting that when we went, there was actually a drought in England, and they were still cutting the grass right to the bone. And so the grass looked terrible when we were there. But hardscaping is important. And unfortunately, here's the really bad news. It should be done first, because it's super destructive. As much as you want to do the gardens, do the hardscaping first, do some research, figure out how it should be constructed. Modern hardscaping uses clear gravel, not screenings. You want to make sure that things are going to last. The stuff the Romans built is still around. And once it's done right, and it ain't cheap, but once it's done right, now you can start going to town with your plants. It doesn't matter what materials you're using, and you can soften the edges, not only with letting things grow in between the stones if necessary. And I personally like moss in between the stones. I like moss anywhere. People call me and say, there's moss growing in my grass. How do I kill it? Is it kind of shady there? Oh, yes. Is it a bit moist? Yes, yes, very. And this moss, is it green? Yes. Be happy. If you got something green growing where it's shady and moist, be happy. So this, I mean, this is a fairly traditional garden, and yet it has English cottage touches. You said there's no right and wrong. Oh my goodness, the peony fell over. Well, that's okay. I don't mind that. You may, and that's okay. And maybe you're going to do something more natural, like natural staking, where when you do your pruning in the spring, you stick those stakes in the ground, those sticks in the ground, and then the peonies can kind of lean on them. You can let it fall. You can let it billow. The hosta's overgrowing the path. Just reach in underneath and rip some leaves off. Divide it next year. Like, you can let the garden go a little bit. English cottage gardens, Canadian cottage gardens, allow you to relax a little bit when you're gardening. There's spotted geranium and a non-native called Corydalis lutea, or yellow fumewort. A lot of the common names are terrible. Just go with the botanical names. They're pretty. So those two plants, very billowy, very delicate. Oddly enough, the geranium gives a bit of bold texture, comparatively bold texture. And then for late summer, there's Veronicastrum coming into bloom, Culver's root. Cottage gardens allow for eccentricity, which, thank goodness. Entrances can be grand and special. How you move from here to there can add mystery to the garden. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. A little rust. So this was a friend of mine, and she was also an interior designer. And she bought this gate, antique, and then it was beautiful. It was pristine. They just repainted it. And she took sandpaper to it and sanded it so that it would rust up a bit, because she didn't want that over freshness. It doesn't even have to be a gate. We put in these two matching cedar logs and then grew climbing roses up it. And at the top, they would arch over and form their own archway, as a green archway. There wasn't even anything going across. And then so this welcomes you to the garden, and you follow the pathway down, and there's a more formal but more artistic gate back here. And again, we grew clematis up over it. Anything that's upright to me is a clematis lattice. Well, any vine really. If I've got an upright surface, oh, a chain link fence. No, don't move. Get back. It's fine. I'm going to plant as many vines on it as I can. And interest and vertical. Inger was talking about the postage stamp yard. It's a great opportunity to use the walls to grow plants on. And there's so many. You can espalier fruit trees. You can put up a wire lattice and grow clematis on. Wooden lattice is hard for most plants to grow on. A wire lattice gives them something to twine on and grab onto, generally speaking. There's that gate from the other angle. And you can see, I got to say, when I went to the Niagara Park School, my area of special interest was the perennial border. And by the time I graduated, I didn't think anything other than a perennial deserved a place in my yard, in anybody's yard for that matter. And it has been a bit of a blow to my ego to realize that my gardens are stronger with shrubs, with trees, with annuals, especially self-seeding annuals. I'm a gardener, so I'm cheap, frugal. So things that self-seed, like Nicotiana, beautiful fragrant plants. There's all sorts of annuals that come back for free every year. Yes, sometimes you have to referee them, pull out the ones where you don't want them, but they can be really interesting. And some of them, like Love in a Mist, Nigella, looks lovely with roses, for instance. And I don't talk about roses an awful lot in here, but roses are lovely cottage garden plants. Vita's Sackville West, probably crazy, but certainly an amazing, most interesting people are crazy. an amazing gardener. She sort of introduced us to the idea of the garden room. When you see this garden on the ground, it's a bunch of little itty bitty gardens. But when you climb up in the tower and look down on it, then you can see how she's divided it into different areas. She was also a very smart lady. She would rip the top off a plant and carry that plant over and put it beside another plant. So, hey, this shade of oriental poppy looks beautiful with these Siberian irises. And then she'd get her husband to do the hard labor. Very clever. Beautiful garden, but this way, everything is a little surprise. Around every corner, you had something new to look at. So this was her big contribution to gardening in general. Because again, the idea is applicable across different platforms. This is Clematis Amelia Platter. Sadly, I've lost this plant, I think, but it was lovely. I really like the species Clematis. They're certainly showy. They're not the great big kaboom fireworks, but then again, they don't suffer from all the diseases like clematis wilt that the great big kaboom fireworks do. They're reliable, they're hardy, they're velvety petals, more loved by pollinators as well, and let things scramble together. We had a job where someone had tied the clematis sort of brutally, like sadism, together, and the poor thing was stuck against the wall and drifting off to the side. And the first thing I did was I took it all apart. I pruned out some of the old wood, and then I spread it on the wall. And what we did was, you can go to Lee Valley, and they have this wire kit that you buy. You get these little buttons, and there's a little eyelet on top of the button, and you fill the bottom with glue, silicone, and stick it to the side of the house. Let it dry for 24 hours, and then you run wires back and forth through them. I've also put screws, left them sticking out on wooden fences, and run wires back and forth so that there's a gap, because the plant needs to get on both sides. If the wire is flush against whatever the surface is, how's the plant going to get in there? How's it going to grab it? Years ago in Milton, we had a speaker on climbing vines, and his speech was entitled "Climbers, Weavers, Hookers, and Twiners." The hookers part got everybody's attention, and it's the different ways that plants twine, but they need to be able to get in there and grab it. Otherwise, you got to be out there tying stuff. And again, nobody is interested in more work. You can also go to a metal artist. There are metal artists out there, and they can build you small wire, like iron structures, where it's like 5 millimeters across, and it can be something very beautiful. And you can custom ask, they can build you something that fits your garden and fits your aesthetic, and that in itself is art. It's kind of tough for humans to accept. I read a book called The Botany of Desire by Michael Pollan, and it's about how plants manipulate us. And it's a neat idea. One of the things that he has a whole chapter on, one of the things we like to do is control things. And it's really hard. If I plant lobelia, cardinal flower, and it dies, but it comes up over there, and it's actually more beautiful over there. Ooh, someone's stealing my thunder, Mother Nature. If something moves on its own, think twice before you pull it out. I've had asters, just plain old New York asters, New England asters, grow up where nothing else would grow. I'm like, oh, I don't want that aster. Wait, it's the only thing that's growing there. Let it go. Mother Nature figured it out. There's lessons, and easy, less work. Asters are something you might want to deadhead. I hardly deadhead anything, but asters can be a little bit frisky. I am many things. I'm not a plant snob. If somebody gives me a plant, I'll find a home for it. This is Rose Campion, and there's that 4 o'clock again that I was talking about. They're plants that a lot of people throw out because they get too aggressive. They're lovely. Generally speaking, cottage gardens are billowy. These are shrub roses. This is catmint, Siberian iris. Again, these are vignettes. And the power of the pot is important. Pots are mobile color. So this is just a pot of ivy geraniums, but we could move it around from places to places as color wasn't over here. Ooh, trundle, 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 there it is. Trundle, trundle. It's actually a wheelbarrow that we can move around. Um, a few little extra lessons. Gray foliage is a referee. Gray foliage is a foil to other colors. So you've got this blindingly vibrant, almost off-putting aster here, but it's lovely because the Artemisia, Powys Castle in this case, softens that vibrant color. That's important. As I said, sunshade. I grew up in a sugar bush. To humans, light is relative. If you walk from a dark inside out into a forest, to you it's much brighter, but to the plants, it's comparatively dark compared to full sunlight. But I didn't read the textbooks. I didn't start with formal training. Like most of us, I started in my garden. And I would go and buy what I liked and I'd stick it in, and certain things lived. And I had chrysanthemums and purple comb flowers and roses and stone crops, sedums growing in my garden. Yes, they had fewer flowers. Yes, the flowers were a bit smaller, but I didn't know any better. I was just happy that I had color and lots of it. Thank you very much. So, don't be afraid to try things. If it really looks like it's going to die, then think about moving it. Even in an English cottage garden, you don't necessarily need flowers. Now, one of the things about Canadian gardens is we plant a lot of trees, and we have a lot of trees. When you climb up the CN Tower and look down, there are more trees in the city than there are in the country. You look from there and you'll see huge swaths of farmland, more trees in the city. So we can't always have bundles of flowers, but you can mix plants together and employ the texture comes and goes. Texture comes and goes. Flowers come and go. Texture will make or break your landscape. Forget that what that other guy said. That was the right one. And you can also promote biodiversity. So hostas don't do anything for anyone except they're pretty, although you can eat them. I really need to try steamed hosta shoots wrapped in prosciutto with brie. That's on my list of things to try. This is a carnival hedge maple. I still get hummingbirds and bees in this vignette because they come and eat the flowers or feed from the flowers of the Solomon seal. And by the way, the flowers of Solomon seal are delicious. So if you want to have some for yourself, then you can, I'm all tangled up in cords. You're going to see me strangle myself here. Too many cables. You could also eat the new shoots. You can pick them when they're new, pick off the big leaves, broil them with a little bit of teriyaki sauce like you would asparagus. Cook them the same way. You'll need the teriyaki sauce because they're a bit bitter, and North Americans generally don't like bitter. This is very English cottagey. Now we've got native ferns in here. We have non-native Bergenia, which is gorgeous in the wintertime. It starts turning burgundy about now, and that lasts right into May. The flowers are a bonus to me. It's the foliage that I want this for. Barrenwort or epimedium. Some of the common names are horrible, aren't they? Barrenwort. This is actually also a fairly shady garden, and yet we had oriental poppies do pretty darn well there. So it's less about flowers and more about foliage and texture in a shady garden, but that doesn't mean that you can't do cottage. As I said, I jumped the gun on the planter thing. This is a very shady garden. It's under a giant catalpa, so we don't have a lot of flowers in the garden, but we have a lot of texture. Glossy foliage brightens the shade. Variegated foliage brightens the shade. And if you had this in a sunny garden, this is back in the day when we planted a lot of miscanthus grass. If you planted in the sun, it would be very sturdy and upright. And in the shade, it's a little more relaxed. There's a parallel in there, but English cottage gardens, isn't there? The letting things flop a little bit is okay. And if you have areas that don't have a lot of color, pots are extraordinarily valuable for that. Back to my vignettes thing, traditional coral bells with some of the neater geraniums, and there's your, actually, those are just plain old pansies. Siberian iris with coral bells and poppies. Sicilian garlic is one of the myriad common names for this. I can never pronounce the Latin name. But look for contrasting colors, which are actually complementary colors. Things opposite each other on the color wheel will naturally look good together. Whether you go with pastels or whether you go with bold color combinations, things opposite each other on the color wheel will look well together. You can also have, this is called color echo, where everything's sort of in the same shades. Now, personally, just me, I find this very relaxing and lovely. I like monochromatic gardens, the white garden, the yellow garden, whatever. Although even Gertrude Jekyll, the queen mother of English cottage gardens, she would throw in the odd exclamation point of blue in a yellow garden. And that makes you appreciate the blue more. Another book you should read is Braiding Sweetgrass. Why are asters and goldenrods beautiful together? Because if it was all aster, all purple, it would sort of fade out in your eyes. If it was all yellow, it would sort of fade out into your eyes. But bees see color of asters and goldenrods the same way we do. Most flowers differently, but they see those the same way we do. So the two make each other pop. Thought that was really interesting. And read Entangled Life, that has nothing to do with this speech, but it's really good. Edibles and flowers together again, vines everywhere. I would put this under the heading of color echo, because you've got the purple burgundies that bring out the purple burgundies in the coneflower there, and you've got contrasting textures in each of these. So you've definitely got all the textures here. This is both bold and feathery at the same time. This has the flower is the bold in this vignette. Look at the foliage color and think of how to complement / contrast it with other things. This is Golden Fortune, anise hyssop, or agastache, bless you. And it is a bee magnet. It's edible if you like licorice, and not everybody does, although natural licorice tastes better. I don't like licorice, but I like anise hyssop. This is a purple beech in the background here. These two look beautiful together because these two complement each other, the purple and the purple burgundy. And then the foliage of this contrasts both in shape to a degree and in color. Combos, vignettes, what's the difference? This is a Chrysanthemum rubellum. I think that's Mary Stoker. Yep. And this little blue guy down here, here we are with the annuals again, that's Salvia. We stuck a planter in here. So there's from Houston, floss flower, ageratum. Even the tropical insane garden, like this is all tropicals. This is also a Hampton Court. And yet it's got that sort of billowy, mingly English cottage thing going on. Now, it's easy to do bold texture using canna lilies. People, my friends are like, why do people like canna lilies so much? Because they're bold. You need that bold. We feel more comfortable when we have that in there. I talked about thinking about why things are pretty. I loved this picture. I love this garden vignette forever. And when I studied saxophone, I thought about why. The yellow bands in the miscanthus bring out the yellow hearts of the Princess Margaret Chrysanthemum rubellum. This is one of the chrysanthemums that's still actually a chrysanthemum. The burgundy tint that's in here brings out the burgundy tint in the flowers of the miscanthus, and yet these two textures contrast each other perfectly. They even bring out the brick red that's in there, brings out the brick red of the brick. And then, excuse me, you have a probably Prince of Wales juniper under here. I didn't plant that guy, so I don't remember. But that's a nativar. So nativars are cultivars of native plants, and they may not be perfect for biodiversity, but they may still satisfy some niche. And that's going to be all over the place depending on the species that you're looking at, like purple dome aster. The flower looks just like regular aster. The leaves look like regular aster. You're going to feed the same things with it. It's just short. And there's nothing wrong with short. Back to art, details, little details. You can pick up anything. I had a little plastic T-Rex in my garden on a rock as you walked in, and people were delighted with it. It would make people smile. You know, some people go, what are you doing? But they'd still smiling while they're doing it. Oh, I found it in the garden. It was planting a plant, and there it was. And this is just wild mullein, non-native, but a neat plant and good for biodiversity. Actually, it's good for pollinators, and I've seen woodpeckers feeding on the bugs that live in it. If it grows, think about leaving it. Little tiny nooks and crannies of things. Stuff in plants like cool stone crops, little tiny sort of English wall plants, like some of the special dianthus work in there. Alpine plants and things like prairie smoke. The native prairie smoke would be ideal in a situation like this. And some of the little dwarf native fescues. I had a native fescue grow in one of my planters, and we left it there for years. It looked a lot like Mexican feathergrass, that sort of super fineness. And we just left it there because it did its own thing. It came there on its own, and it was a nice counterpointed texture to whatever I was doing in the garden. Nature does weird things on her own. We built these stone troughs. They're hypertufa troughs filled with alpines for a customer. They didn't have a spirea on the property. We don't know where this came from. And yet, because it was growing in gravel, this wasn't a special dwarf cultivar. Because it was growing in pure gravel, it stayed dwarf. It was neat. I mentioned invasives already. So there's the Grow Me Instead guide, which is very Canadian. We don't tell people what to do. We just try and give them better, more complete information. And why would you want to plant a Crimson King maple, which is impossible to garden under once they get big? They're so dry, so dark, when you could plant ruby lace honey locust. This is a nativar. It's burgundy. It plays well with others. It has dappled shade. It fertilizes the plants around it. This particular burgundy goes beautifully with anything. You know, the pink impatience. Yeah, impatience. The burgundy Japanese maple. This is a lovely thing. There are always better options. One of my customers, the customer's not always right. I know this isn't a professional, like I'm not speaking to professionals. Sure, some of you are, but the customer, whoever thought of that is crazy. The customer's always right. Can you imagine if your doctor went, oh, well, you know, the patient's always right? No. I had a lady the other day ask me for a burning bush. And I went, no. And she looked at me with great big eyes. And I said, no, you want a chokeberry, either black chokeberry or brilliant chokeberry. They have spring flowers for the pollinators. They have berries that start in late summer and persist right through till next spring when the birds are going to eat them. So they've got fall and winter interest and spectacular fall color. Why do you want something that only blooms, like does its thing? Doesn't even bloom well. It does its thing for about 2 weeks. Maybe. They don't, a lot of them just sort of smolder. Why do I want that when you could have something that has multiple seasons of interest? And back to the winter thing, winter interest. So that was a lot in a reasonably short period of time, but I confess I went a little fast so that I could answer a lot of questions. I love questions. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram. I love public questions because when people ask me questions publicly, which hopefully I want to, and I'll check the chat as well, then everybody learns from them. People say there's no stupid questions. I take it a step further and say that I have never had someone ask me a question that someone else didn't want to know the answer to. So after tonight, feel free to reach out to me on any of the social networking platforms. I'm even on Snapchat, but I don't know if anyone's listening. So having said all that, I'm gonna
I can field
stop
a few.
sharing.
Yeah, sure. I can field a few questions that are in the chat. I did want to make a comment about color combinations. You mentioned asters and goldenrod, and every day as I'm driving to work, I see all of the asters in the ditches with the goldenrod,
Yeah.
and it's nice actually. There's white and purple asters, and that whole white, purple, and yellow
Oh,
is
yeah.
just like stunning together. And it's like inspiration for, okay, how do I do that here?
Well, Danielle, you touched on something very important there. I talked about gray foliage being a foil, a referee. White flowers are too. So you got two really bold colors. Now right now the world is all bold. You've got two really bold colors like purple and yellow. Throw a little white in between them, and it just dials it down a little bit and makes us happier.
Gives
Easier to
that
look at.
like breathing space between them, really.
Yeah. Someone's asking about oriental poppies. I had luck growing them from seed. We want to plant the biggest plant money can buy. If you plant little things and look after them, they adapt to difficult soil. And I think a lot of plants in Ontario die not from cold winters and not from drying out in the summer, but from wet winters. Clay soil is tough. A lot of Ontario is clay. And if you're planting baby plants, they're going to adjust better to that, those challenging conditions.
I'll go back up. One person asked about, I planted an Eastern red bud, about 2-year-old sapling, how to protect it. Is there anything more than just those white tubes or wire cages?
The white tubes you have to be very careful with. You need to readjust them every couple of years, or the plant grows and sometimes they bind on themselves. I expect it's which way you wind the stuff, and I've never got it right. We started here. We have an unusual problem here. We have a problem with beaver. So I want to grow trees to shade the pond so it doesn't overheat the water that's going to dump in the nearby creek. So we just went and bought hardware cloth, and we just put it on temporarily for plants that are going to be bunny fodder. For the beavers, we use zip ties to do it. But for bunnies, I make a temporary shelter, and then I just put those off to the side or dismantle them and stack them for the winter time. A great, I saw a study from the University of Arkansas that said that if you mix eggs and milk and water together and spray it on, that sticks well. To the animals, that smells like rotting eggs. To us, it does not. So you spray it on a sunny day, and that will deter deer. Winnipeg Parks use this on their tulips, and bunnies as well. So that's another thing that you can do. There are things that you can buy, like Ropel and Scoot, that will do the same job. But if I can swing it natural, I do.
Someone asked, what do you think
Chaser.
of pokeweed plant? I have one, but I'm worried it will spread even though it's a native. The birds love it.
It will spread, and that's okay. You just pull out the ones you don't like. That face, I don't know if you saw me go. I just got my first pokeweed plant this year. I love it. It's statuesque. It's interesting. It stains your clothes, so watch yourself. It's also deadly poison. So there's lots of things that are deadly poison. It's an opportunity to say to the grandkids, hey, Jibby, don't stick everything in your mouth that you can find until you talk to mom or dad or grandma or grandpa. It is, well, actually, if you cook it twice, if you double boil it, apparently it's really good and good for you. I got to give mine a few years to get big enough. But we're designing a butterfly garden in Grimsby, and it's riddled with invasive species, but it's also got pokeweed everywhere. So the ones that you don't like, pull them out when they're young. If it grows where you don't want it, remove it. But I think it's a neat plant, and yes, it's native, and it's great for bees and butterflies and pollinators, and I don't know what obligate species feed on it, species that must feed on it, but I bet there's a few. But it's a cool plant and an opportunity to educate people.
Are there any plants that are a natural deterrent to groundhogs, which tend to play havoc at the cottage, they say? I've never.
Yes, I would try. Well, okay. I have not tried to fight groundhogs, although that would make an interesting reality TV show. I would try shrub roses, like Rosa Carolina. Now they run themselves. You may end up having a bigger problem with shrub like wild roses than you did with the groundhogs. But they're going to form a pretty dense mat. The thing is, the groundhogs are going to find a way through, so you're going to have to occasionally block bits and pieces. I would actually try that recipe that I mentioned with the eggs. I do not know if it'll work, but if it works on deer and bunnies, then it might work on the groundhogs as well. I don't know, and I'd like someone to try it and let me know. There's also those solar-powered sonic machines that emit a high-pitched boop. But with any solution, you got to switch it up. You can use human hair, but it's only going to work for a while. You can dangle a bar of soap and it may or may not work. I don't know. you can use coyote urine, and I want to meet the people that harvest the coyote urine. That's a job and a half right there. But you got to keep switching it up, because the animals, if they get hungry enough, will get used to it. So no single solution is going to do the trick.
So if you have like,
Someone's asking about witch hazel too. And check out, folks saw my email address there. You can email me and I'll send you a list of native plant nurseries. I imagine there's one also on the Ontario Master Gardeners Facebook page, because the native plant nurseries will have it. And if your nursery doesn't have what you want, ask them. People, I'm a garden writer. I'm a member of the Garden Writers Association. We get in trouble all the time for suggesting things that aren't available. If we didn't suggest things that weren't available, you'd be buying the same stuff that you bought 40 years ago. It takes people to go to their little local garden center, buy from your little local garden center. They need the business. They're dropping like flies. When we lose all those little local garden centers, the box stores will only need to sell boxwood. It's the crazy little garden centers run by crazy little gardeners that make sure that we have cool stuff to grow. Sorry.
Yeah, this the latest question actually ties into one thing I was going to ask. So they say, could you grow lettuce at the periphery of your property to give bunnies and gophers an alternative to eating your garden? And I was sort of curious, like, with the original Cottage Gardens, were a combination of vegetables and flowers. And so is there some kind of deterrent, or you give them a little bit so they don't take it all?
Well, diversity equals resilience. So the more different types of plants you have, the higher the odds that there will be something to eat something else. Let nature take its course. Coyotes are scary, but you don't really need to fear them. But we want them to take down the bunnies. Snakes, I hate snakes. Yeah, but the snakes are gonna eat the baby bunnies. The more you can do, the better. Generally speaking, my instinct is that the more you plant for the animals, the more animals you're going to get.
Yeah.
It might work at the beginning. There is something called lure cropping if you do it away from the other stuff. So if you ever get a chance to go to Oak Hammock Marsh near Winnipeg, it is the Canadian Ducks Unlimited headquarters, and it's amazing. And the building is spectacularly beautiful, and they've done a shortgrass prairie on the rooftop. But they bought some nearby farms so that they could grow some corn to feed the birds that were flying through. And that's called lure cropping. So it can work. You just have to make sure that the lure crop is big enough to feed the number of animals that you have. Maybe that's the most scientific answer I can think of.
Someone asked about a native holly that you had mentioned. Do you know that?
Yeah. So Ilex is the genus for holly, Ilex, and sparkleberry or winterberry. There's lots of different common names for things. There's no right or wrong common name. We have accepted common names, but I learned it as sparkleberry, and that's a way cooler name. That's one where I'm okay with nativars as well, cultivars of native plants, because you need boys and girls for hollies to get berries. You need one boy and up to 5 female plants. If you're buying the nativars, you're getting Berry Poppins, the girl, or Mr. Poppins, the boy. And I'm okay with it. Yeah, I know they're starting to really have fun with
I like the
naming of
hascaps.
plants.
There's like Beauty and Beast. Yeah.
Oh, no way, that's brilliant. I didn't know you needed boy and girls for hascaps.
Yes, you do.
How about that? Is it boy and girls, or is it just different varieties?
Oh, possibly.
Okay.
I have both.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I want to grow them. They look amazing. But yeah, that's fun. That is actually fun, especially if the one is big and rangy.
Yeah. Actually, the berries on Beauty are bigger than the berries on Beast. Yeah.
Well, that's very equal opportunity. That's good.
You had mentioned
there are actually a few different native hollies. Ilex glabra is a good alternative to boxwood. Inkberry holly, and there's a mountain holly as well, but you never ever see that in the trade.
I think you had touched on this, but other examples of native plants that like dry shade?
I did try and go back to that one as I was
Yeah.
trucking along. If I seemed a little disjointed sometimes, it was because I saw something in the chat
Yeah.
window that I thought, oh, I'll just deal with this now. So other plants for dry shade, once you get them established, super key, include Canada wild ginger. One of my favorites, actually. Thank you for bringing this back to me. Virginia waterleaf. And there's also a Canada waterleaf. Hydrophyllum. I love the literal name, hydrophyllum, water leaf. Virginianum, Virginia, and Canadensis, the Canadian one. The bumblebees go gaga over the white to purple flowers in the spring. You can eat it. One of the common names is shiny lettuce, SHAWNEE. And it's a great plant and it spreads well. Believe it or not, if you can find it, and I'd love it if we had local seed sources, but we do not. Wood poppy, WOOD.
Mm.
Wood poppy what? It great big yellow flowers, leaves a lot like greater celandine, so you got to watch that you get them right. But they're both bold and ferny at the same time and a little bit bluish. They will often rebloom in the fall. Let them seed down. I don't know how this plant is endangered, but it is. I've found them to be fecund. They spread like mad, but in a good way. And so you get these big yellow flowers in the spring, and then the blue leaves throughout the summer, and then more flowers in the spring again. And there's about 10 things tickling at the back of my brain, but that'll, if it's moist. No, you said dry shade.
Yeah.
Sorry, because I immediately bounced to a plant that I think needs to be used more, but it likes it wet, which is spice bush.
Okay. Yeah, someone mentioned mayapple be one.
Yeah, but it goes dormant in the late summer.
Yeah.
If you're okay with that, it's a lovely plant. And if you're really lucky, you get the fruit from it, which when it turns yellow, not only is it reputed to be an anti-carcinogen, but you bite the skin, just puncture it, and then squirt the juice in your mouth and mash it around with your tongue so that you can spit the seeds back into the wild. Bananas and strawberries. It was a plant that I ate while waiting for the school bus in grade 4. Like, I love this plant, but you got to know that some years it goes dormant. It also gets some years it gets Barbary rust, so you get orange spots all over it because it's in the Berberaceae family, which is neat and weird. Moles. Someone asked about moles.
Yeah.
Moles are easy. You just have to control the grubs. So nematodes to control the grubs. Moles are what eats meat? Carnivorous. I was stuck on omnivorous. So they only eat meat. They only eat worms and grubs. So if you can, moles are a symptom of a grub problem. So if you get rid of the grubs, you get rid of the moles. By the way, those sonic things work apparently on moles too. So
does that apply to voles as well?
no, small thermonuclear weapons don't get rid of voles.
Okay, yeah, I've got them.
So one of the things that I have been trying to do, and I have one at my new place, and we built one for a customer a couple of years ago. We built a hibernaculum. So we dug a big hole, we filled it with rocks. We put some, as we filled it, we put some perforated drainage tile in that would lead to the outside. Then we put landscape fabric over it and then covered it with earth, leaving those holes exposed. And then, and I know some of you are going to love this, but then snakes move in. And the snakes are going to go after the voles. So the answer to most of today's, like the modern days questions, is biodiversity. If you can get something to move in, I had a consultation on a job where they had a problem with muskrats eating out the cattails. What do? Put up a raptor pole. What's a raptor pole? It's a straight up pole with a cross member at the top, because apparently muskrats are delicious. So if you can give the raptors a place to plant, a place to perch, then they'll take down the muskrats. And that actually happened. One of my customers had a tree die, and all the muskrats got cleaned out of the pond because the raptors could perch in the tree, and then their pond got taken over by cattails. So biodiversity is super, super key.
Great. I think that was all the questions that had come through so far. Are there any lingering ones before we part?
Biostability, good word, Susan. I like that. Yes, foam flower and columbine.
Yep.
Just skimming back, those are great plants for dry shade, especially if you grow the columbine from seed, or if mama columbine that you planted and paid, stupid amounts of money for, if she dies, don't panic. She probably dropped seed before she died, and the seed will be much better adapted.
Mhm. That's great.
So thank you, everybody. You're a really cool audience. Like I felt a good vibe, which you don't always get on Zoom. So
True. Yeah, thank you so much, Sean. That was really informative. And we will be posting the recording on our website. So just keep an eye out for that. Might take us a few days, but we'll get it up there eventually. So yeah. So thank you so
Awesome.
much. And again, like Sean said, contact him if you have any lingering questions.
I'll put my email address in the chat window as well.